Okay, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon from here in Ghana. I take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this engagement with the IMF. On behalf of University of Ghana, this is a privilege to partner the IMF in this discussion of the latest World Economic Outlook Update 2021. I'm sure we're all looking forward to it. We are interested in knowing what is in this recovery. Is it a job-rich recovery? Is it inclusive? How green is it? And all of that, particularly for us in Sub-Saharan Africa, given the population dynamics, we have a lot of the youths entering the labor market and those who have also lost their jobs because of COVID-19. So I'm sure you'll be interested in terms of the response and engagement that we're going to have this afternoon here in Ghana and morning at other places. So I take this opportunity to welcome all of you to this virtual encounter. It promises to be an interesting excitement because we have the opportunity of engaging the chief economist and the head of the IMF research department and the first female chief economist actually. And that is actually an inspiration to a lot of us on the continent. And to our female community in the university's young economists, that you can also make it to the top. And then we have two other student panelists from the University of Ghana, Legon. So my job is very simple. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and then I will hand over to Dennis to begin with, and then the other panelists would also join. So we do know that the world since 2020 has not been the same and will not be the same. And the reason is simple. It's because of COVID-19, which has become known now as a great lockdown. Individuals, firms, countries, multilateral institutions have deployed various policies and strategies in saving lives and saving livelihoods. But there has been something that we have all been looking forward to. What is ahead of us? And it's better to hear from those who have that technicalities to tell us what lies ahead in terms of the economic recovery. And that is why we have gathered here. Our main speaker is Dr. Gita Gopinath, who is an Indian-American economist and is also the chief economist of the IMF and the head of the economic research since 2019. In that role, as I mentioned, she is also the economic counselor of the fund. Given that majority of the audience are in the youths, less than 40, they are in the universities and all of that, it's good that we also get to know her academic qualification, that theoretically she's sound and empirically she's in terms of the experience as well. She received her PhD in economics from the Princeton University after earning a BA from Lady Sri Sam College and MA degrees from the Delhi School of Economics and the University of Washington. And as I mentioned earlier, she's the first female chief economist of the IMF. Gita is an elected fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and of the Econometric Society, and the recipient of the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the University of Washington. In 2019, the Foreign Policy named her as one of the top global thinkers. In 2014, she was named one of the top 25 economists under 45 by the IMF. And in 2011, she was chosen as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. The Indian government has also awarded her the Pravasi Bharatiya Samman, the highest honor conferred on overseas Indians. So let me welcome Dr. Gita Gopinath to this virtual encounter. Doc, you are welcome.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gopinath, for the kind introduction. It's a real pleasure for me to participate in this event. I mean, the University of Ghana is the oldest university in Ghana. It's the largest university in terms of number of students. And from what I'm told, it's produced almost all the leaders in Ghana. So it is a fantastic university, and I'm sure as students you must feel great pride in being at this university. So again, my pleasure, and I look forward to having this conversation with Dennis and Sarah, and ready to start whenever you are, Dennis.
Let me introduce our student panelists from the University of Ghana, and then I will hand over to Dennis from that level. Dennis is a first-year PhD student in migration studies at the University of Ghana, Legon. He holds a Master of Philosophy degree in finance from the University of Ghana Business School with a research interest in climate change, inequality, migration, and the gig economy. Dennis is a project officer and analyst at the Private Enterprise Federation of Ghana. And our second student panelist is Sarah Appiah, who is currently a second-year PhD student in economics at the University of Ghana, Legon, specifically Department of Economics. She's a development researcher with interest in trade policy, gender, poverty, vulnerabilities, and fisheries resource management. Sarah has served as programs and research officer for D-Link Services, Center for Parliamentary Research and Development, conducting both local and national level policy research. I now hand over to Dennis Osechre to begin the conversation. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gita. It's wonderful to have you on this platform for this interaction. Yeah, we deem it a great privilege to have this interaction on the World Economic Outlook. We know students here are also expectant to have more insights on the global economy from the IMF perspective. Now the World Economic Outlook projects the world economy to grow at 5.5% and this year, and also 4.2% in 2022. However, in recent, with this projection, the IMF was alluding to the fact that there's a likely expectation of vaccine successes. However, in recent times, we can see that there's a surge in the infections and also new variants of the virus, as well as certain logistical challenges that is continuing with the vaccine rollout. So with these challenges at play, we want to find out what the economic outlook for this year and next year is, and how much of uncertainties has been accounted for, and how stable is that. Gita.
Thank you, Sarah. The past year, 2020, was extraordinary in so many ways. It was a crisis like no other. And our estimate is that the global economy shrunk by 3.5%, which is, historically, if you in comparison to previous recessions. So now we've entered 2021. The good news is there was tremendous success with vaccines. Now we should remember that was not guaranteed. So that was actually very positive outcome that the vaccines were successful and also at a pretty high level of effectiveness. But then this year has reminded us that this pandemic is so much more complicated because you have new virus variants. And as long as people are not sufficiently vaccinated, you will have new variants that keep coming up in different parts of the world, which then may make it difficult to end this pandemic. So looking forward, I would say the one plus, and this is something we see when you just look across the globe and the different countries, is that while in the beginning, in the first half of 2020, the pandemic really had a very large hit on economic activity. Economies went into very strict lockdowns. This was so new that people were just adjusting to it. And so you saw very large drops in economic activity. But what we are seeing across the globe now is that even when cases have gone up and when there's been even higher levels of hospitalization and death, even in those parts of the world, you've actually seen that economic activity, while it has been hit, it's not been as badly hit. So the world has adapted to living, however imperfectly, with this virus. Now, going forward, we have, like you said, projected a rebound in growth to 5.5% this year. The issue, of course, is that this is not the same for all countries. There's very divergent paths of recoveries. There are some countries that are recovering very fast. There are others that are projected to take many more years to get there. And one important factor behind that, of course, is the fact that there's an unequal access to vaccines around the world. There's a limited supply, and there are many countries that will have to wait until next year, for instance, to get sufficient amount of vaccines. So that's, I think, one of the biggest challenge that we have to deal with. So any projection we make about the future in terms of the economic content is very closely tied to how well we do on the health front. So let me just stop with that.
Thank you, Gita. Now, Gita, on the subject of unemployment, I would want to find out how job-rich is this recovery, and how can policymakers help to drive job growth outside the informal sector in Sub-Saharan Africa?
I mean, indeed, like all crises, the job market gets hit very hard. But in this time around, you saw that it was pretty dramatic, for instance, in the second quarter of 2020, when you saw unemployment numbers that you really haven't seen before. The other piece that you saw was how unequally it affected different workers. So if you work in an industry, which is mostly a technology sector, in the technology sector, and you can work from home, you can work remotely, then you manage to do okay in this crisis. But on the other hand, the vast majority of workers who don't have that ability to work remotely, who work in what you call contact intensive activities, for instance, hospitality, entertainment, restaurants, and so on, have been very hard hit. The informal sector has been very hard hit also in this crisis. Again, something different from previous crises, because in the previous crisis, the formal sector would be hit hard, and you actually would see that people would then retreat into the informal sector, which would be some sort of a shock absorber. But this time, of course, given the particular features of this crisis, the informal sector also has been hit very hard. We've seen young workers being hit particularly hard, women being hit particularly hard, low-skilled workers being hit very hard. So this is the kind of landscape we are looking at this point. So as we see recoveries, when you put in growth numbers of 5.5%, it sounds good, but you have to keep in mind that there are many young workers, many low-income workers, many women who have been left behind. And we have to make sure that when the recovery comes, that even they come back into jobs. So to your question of how to make that happen, first, we know that just bringing back a stronger recovery is going to help all of these workers, right? I mean, we know that if you're going to bring back, if we can deal with the health crisis, we can make sure that there are sufficient vaccinations, and people at the same time practice, prudent measures like social distancing, wearing masks, and so on. We can see activity coming back, and as activity comes back, and as you reopen sectors that otherwise have been shut down, you will see people coming back into jobs. More to kind of further strengthen the shift from informality to formality, I mean, two features are very important. One is having the right amount of skills. So the training has to be provided for that. Labor market policies can help in that dimension. And the second is education. I mean, there's no substitute for very high quality education, making sure that a large breadth of the population gets it. That's the only way that you can raise skills and again, improve formality. And of course, a third piece is the business environment. By having the right kind of business environment, you can also create the opportunities for more formal kinds of employment.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Gita, for that on Africa continent as a whole. Now let's come to Ghana. With Ghana, just as African countries having a very youthful population and high unemployment, particularly among graduate youth, what would this recovery mean for Ghana, especially now that in the midst of this crisis that we are having more job and productivity losses?
Indeed. So again, this is a challenge that many countries are facing, and like you said, specifically in Ghana too, this is a concern. The steps that tend to work in many countries, of course, is again when you provide the right kind of infrastructure, which, by the way, also includes digital infrastructure. Very important. We have seen that this crisis has given a big boost to the digital economy. Those engaged with the digital economy have been able to keep their jobs and continue much better than others have. So when you create the right kind of digital infrastructure, when you have the right kind of business environment, that then incentivizes new kinds of businesses coming online, especially services businesses, and that creates jobs that are productive jobs, they're well-paying jobs, and that's what you need to create to be able to have many more jobs, so that when the youth come out of college, that they get these kinds of opportunities. And of course, you want to make sure that the training in universities is matched to the skills that are needed in the economy. So you have to kind of focus on ensuring that you get the right kind of education, the right kind of skill training, and also, encourage both men and women to access financial resources, provide them with financing to also get into entrepreneurial activity. That's another way of dealing with this problem.
Thank you for that. And also, as you were explaining earlier, we are aware that Sub-Saharan Africa has a large informal sector, and women are mostly known to be the backbone of the informal economy. So with this pandemic, we know women in the informal sector are facing huge risk. How do we ensure that growth is inclusive enough and also gender equitable?
Yep, Sarah. So firstly, again, an important part of the job loss in this crisis has come because certain kinds of activities have shut down. And in this particular crisis, those activities, which again include, restaurants, tourism, entertainment, hospitality, these are sectors where women tend to have a greater share of the labor market. So when you've closed these down, you have seen that women have been harder hit. While in typical recessions, it's usually manufacturing that's much harder hit as opposed to services. And so it tended to be that men were harder hit in past recessions, but this time around it's women. So again, in terms of how do you solve that problem, like I said, I think an important part of it will be solved as you reopen, as economies reopen, as people have the confidence to go out and engage in these kinds of contact intensive activities. That will, of course, require solving the health crisis, even if it's not complete, even if the virus is not completely eliminated, which of course it seems unlikely that it will be. But you can certainly bring it down to a level where hospitalization rates are manageable, given the healthcare capacity of the country. Then you can see activity come back. So just solving the current health crisis problem, I believe, will help women return significantly to the workforce. The other parts of it, of course, is what I said, which applies to my previous answer, which is better skill training, better education, right infrastructure, including digital infrastructure, right business environment. All of these kind of organically can generate a lot of new jobs, again, which can attract women. One of the things I do point out about this crisis is that, as you know, it's hit women very hard, but I'm hoping that because we've learned to work more flexibly, which is work from home more flexibly, that maybe that will actually allow women to enter the labor force more, because one of the big problems for women entering the workforce has been the need to manage home and work, which unfortunately doesn't get equally shared between men and women even now. But I think if you can make this much more give them the greater flexibility of work from home, you could see a situation where actually women engage even more with economic activity.
Thank you on that.
All right, we want to remind the participant that they can put in their questions in the chat box. Now, Gita, on the subject of digitalization, the COVID crisis has largely benefited the digital sector, and the pandemic has highlighted the need to accelerate digital transformation and invest in digital infrastructure. My question is, how can countries prioritize digital spending in their crisis recovery, and what impact might it have on these countries?
So again, indeed, this is the digital sector has been one of the one of the winners of this crisis. Countries that have very good digital infrastructure where people have access to broadband networks. These are the countries that have managed to overcome this crisis with limited disruptions. And so that and this is not going anywhere soon. So this is, I believe, a trend shift. We will see much more of a digital economy growing post this pandemic. So what does that mean? That means that countries absolutely will need to invest in digital infrastructure and broadband networks, because otherwise we will have a phenomenon where you have some countries that are growing much faster than other countries because they already have the infrastructure in place. So that is going to be an important piece of public investment, but also it's going to be it has to be important to bring in private sector investment into digitizing the economy. So that's one piece of it. The second is, also you have to keep in mind that one of the benefits of having a digital economy that we've seen in this crisis is the ability to more quickly put cash in the hands of people who need it, the most vulnerable, because that was just one of the fastest ways to get relief measures into the hands of people. And so it also has social welfare consequences of having a strong digital economy.
Thank you.
Okay, Gita. Now we want to touch on issues with debt. We know that debt countries.
Sarah, I could not hear you.
Okay, I'm touching on debt issues. Yeah, we know that debt issues has been one of the major challenges in Sub-Saharan Africa, especially with low-income countries. I think one of your reports in February 2020 suggested that more low-income countries, about half of them, and even emerging countries were at the risk of debt distress, even from before the onset of the pandemic. We want to know that beyond the G20 debt service suspension, is the IMF considering another round of debt relief or debt cancellation to help its poorest members? And also, how can these countries ensure that debt sustainability will be ensured during this pandemic?
So indeed, debt has been a very important issue that we have been grappling with. Even the G20 has been grappling with. So the debt service suspension initiative that you mentioned was indeed a G20 initiative that was the goal of which was to provide some liquidity relief to countries, to low-income countries that had their debt payments coming due at the middle of a pandemic, so that they could instead use those resources for spending in the health sector, for providing cash transfers to their poor households. So those were the priorities, and this was the space that was given. That debt service suspension initiative was extended until the middle of this year. So it does continue to have that benefit until the middle of this year. The question is, what else can be done? What else has been done? So I think another very important outcome that came about in 2020 was the common framework. The common framework for debt restructuring, what it does is that it puts all your creditors on a level playing field. Because they work together, it brings together the Paris Club creditors, it brings together non-Paris Club creditors together. And the idea is to very quickly agree on terms bilaterally, of course, country by country, but using a common framework to figure out exactly what kind of restructuring would be done. And once that's agreed upon, of course, everybody has to is subject to those conditions. And you cannot turn around and go to another creditor and say, we'll give you better conditions. So that includes the private sector there too. So this is a pretty ambitious push for change. Now, of course, a lot is going to depend upon the implementation. We shall see how that happens, if we're going to see exactly how that plays out in the next 3 months. The IMF is very closely involved in this, including in terms of determining debt sustainability of countries. So we are engaged with the G20 on this front. I mean, the IMF itself has provided debt relief to its poorest members last year, and even this year we continue to do so until April. And depending on the funds, we'll see what happens in terms of extensions. In terms of the G20, DSSI, and whether there will be another extension, I think that will be determined in April when we have the spring meetings. But again, importantly, these are important issues, and we have to make sure the countries have the resources to deal with the crisis that they're facing right now, and also do it in a durable way. So it's not something just a patchwork that helps the country now, but then doesn't solve the problem on a more long-term basis.
Thank you, Gita. We still want to remind the participants to put their questions in the chat box. You might want to precede the question with the name of your organization, as well as the program you are doing as a student. Now, Gita, assuming that vaccines and therapies remain effective against the new virus, we may be able to reduce the impact of the crisis and arrest the divergence in prospects across and within countries. But this will require more on the policy front. The question is, what can policymakers do to support the recovery? And can these support measures be used to drive greener and more inclusive growth?
So indeed, I think the success on the vaccine front makes it possible that we will exit this crisis with lesser scarring than what we worried about in the beginning of the pandemic. We also can point to the very large amounts of policy support that was provided around the world, much more, of course, in advanced economies than in others. But this is quite unprecedented in terms of the size of the support that was provided compared to any other crisis, both fiscal and monetary policy support. And because major central banks around the world, have brought down interest rates so low, we've actually seen financing conditions improve in many parts of the world, even though this was a historic recession. So what needs to be done to maintain the recovery? First and foremost, it's all about vaccinations, which is that this crisis is not over until it's over everywhere. The pandemic will continue to pose serious risks to the world as long as you have unvaccinated populations in different parts of the world where you end up with having new variants or virus variants coming up. So that requires action. I mean, right now we have most of the vaccines having been bought up by advanced economies. There are some emerging markets in middle-income countries and some low-income countries that have access, but the vast majority of developing countries have to wait until the end of this year or into 2022 to get any kind of decent coverage. So that's the first problem that needs to be fixed. The second issue, of course, is that until we get there, countries will continue to need to provide policy support. Now, while that may come much more easily to advanced economies that have this large policy space, the other countries, developing countries, don't necessarily have it. So you're going to have to provide concessional financing, grants, aid, debt relief to many of these countries so that they can continue to support their people until we are durably past this pandemic. And yes, it's very important that the actions that are being taken now are with an eye to putting the world on a sustainable path, a job-rich recovery, and also investing in the digital infrastructure. So we talk a lot about this in terms of what needs to be done to have, for the climate economy. Indeed, there's a need for climate mitigation. There's no doubt about that. And we talk about the need for green infrastructure spending as a part of a package to address the climate problem. But there's also a big need for countries to adapt to climate change. I mean, many countries, it's not just about mitigation, but you are dealing with catastrophic risks on a daily basis. Many of these countries do not have the resources to just deal with it themselves. Again, financing from the international community will be needed. And again, all countries have to plan for a more inclusive future. This requires different kinds of policy measures. Some of it is, expanding the social safety net. You saw that happen in the middle of the crisis. You might decide to keep it for much more longer, given that we know that this is quite crucial to help people. So there is a lot to be done in 2021, though we are projecting global growth to recover strongly to 5.5%. There is still uncertainty. We still have the pandemic with us, and there is still a lot of policy action that's needed.
Correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Gita. Yeah, now on the African continent, we're looking at recovery measures. We know that the African Continental Free Trade Area that was just launched, and which has come into full implementation last January, offers a lot of promises for Africa's growth. Looking at the common market, what role do you think the common market can play in the recovery process and also addressing the issues of inequality on the African continent? Again, how can we ensure that trade becomes more beneficial to Africans and not to others?
So the African continent free trade area it's a total game changer. I think it's a very impressive accomplishment to be able to have this common market. And we know that there's a lot of scope for growth in cross-regional trade within the African continent. When you look at some other regions, you see that intra-regional trade is about 25% of their imports, while in the case of the African continent, that's about 12 to 15%. So there is that distance that they can go, which is very beneficial. Second, when you look at the kinds of goods that are traded within the continent, you see that has a much more manufacturing components to it. It has a much more value-added component to it. So that again has this additional virtue of helping companies build expertise in certain kinds of high-value products because through having this larger common market. What we've known from trade in the past is that you certainly have benefits to a lot of people. It raises productivity, it lowers prices at which consumers buy products. But of course, we also know that it can create disruptions in terms of jobs, in terms of some people lose their jobs. So therefore, it's very important to combine this kind of policy also with domestic policy to make sure that you are protecting the most vulnerable when policies like this are put in place. But this is, will be very beneficial for the African continent.
Thank you, Gita. Thank you, Gita. I believe that we know climate change today is an issue, and Africa or Sub-Saharan Africa really suffers disproportionately from the impact of climate change. Now, my question would be, what is the responsibility of the global community, and what can be done in the countries most impacted?
I think 2021, this year, is the year of the climate. I'm seeing tremendous momentum around the world in recognizing, and it has been recognized, the importance of climate change and the catastrophic effects it will have. But you're seeing momentum build up everywhere in terms of addressing it and treating it as an urgent problem, as opposed to something that can be, tackled partially along the way. So what needs to be done? So firstly, of course, you need measures to prevent the planet from overheating. right now, the trajectory on which the world is on, that's not going to happen automatically. So we actually put out a report in October last year where we said you needed a three-pronged approach, which was one, green public investment push to provide the infrastructure to make sure there is investment in renewables, energy efficiency, and so on. But you have to combine that with a path of rising carbon prices, which is a predictable path. You kind of start off slow, but then you increase that over time. That is essential to make sure that people actually consume lesser energy over time. If you don't have that, then you just don't get the improvement in terms of climate. And then the third piece, which is that obviously policies that raise prices for certain kinds of energy can hit low-income households very hard. So you have to make sure that you have a social safety net to ensure that you use some of the revenues that you gain, for instance, from carbon pricing, to transfer that to low-income households so they can actually deal with rising energy prices in the interim. And all of this we've shown will create millions of jobs in the next 7 to 10 years. It will boost the recovery, it will strengthen the recovery. So these are the measures to be taken. Then, of course, there are countries where it's not mitigation, but it's adaptation, which are countries that they were not the source of the problem, but they are facing the brunt of it. And they're, of course, investing in the right amount of, climate resilient infrastructure, dealing with how you can adapt agriculture to climate change. All of that is needed, but that can be very expensive. And so there is an important dialogue going on how to help, especially low-income countries, deal with these kinds of investments that they have to make to prevent otherwise natural disasters from wiping out their economy on a yearly basis. So these are some of the important issues that we are grappling with at the fund, and actually it's an issue that everybody in the world is grappling with.
All right, thank you, Gita. We have a question coming in, and it's on the global economy. One of the students wants to find out, when should we expect the global economy to reach its pre-pandemic levels?
A very good question. So in terms of our projections that we had in January, we have actually the global economy as a whole gets to pre-pandemic levels, which is 2019 levels this year. But the reason it does that is because of some countries. So you have China, for instance, that grew at around 2% in 2020 and is projected to grow by another 8% this year. You also have the US, which is on a faster recovery path and getting back to pre-pandemic levels very quickly. We'll expect to get there this year. So overall, that's the picture, but there is a lot of heterogeneity. So if you look at, for instance, if you look at Europe, most of Europe is going to wait until 2022. If you look at similarly, if you look at Sub-Saharan Africa, you look at Latin America, even emerging Asia, excluding China and India, you're getting to, it's going to take a while. The other thing to keep in mind is that it's not just about getting back to pre-pandemic level. The question is, how long is it going to take to get back, if at all, to the pre-pandemic projected path, right? So how much of scarring will this crisis have in the sense of having a permanent hit? And right now, while that scarring is not as large as after a global financial crisis, it still is there. So the world economy is not expected to get back to its pandemic projected path this year or next year. So this is going to take some time to get there. But again, I just want to emphasize that there is tremendous heterogeneity country by country. Actually, Ghana is a country that actually grew both in 2020 and is projected to grow again in 2021. So it's obviously, past its pre-pandemic level. But there are many countries where it will take some time. And again, one has to also keep in mind that this crisis is not over. Times are still uncertain. And again, things can change pretty quickly.
All right, thank you, Gita.
Okay. Another participant wants to find out how Ghana can ensure that its economic growth is high, and at the same time, it's dealing with the spread of the virus. That's the person is asking in connection with the restrictions. How can we ensure these restrictions and also ensure economic growth?
So indeed, again, like I said, Ghana is a country that it was hit hard in 2020, but it is one of the countries that, according to our estimates, grew in 2020, and I think it was 0.9%, and then it's projected to grow by over 4% this year. It was hit hard, and it had the containment measures in the first half of last year. Those measures have come out gradually. The strategy of telling people to maintain social distancing, to wear masks, to follow best practices in terms of hygiene, washing your hands and all of that. These are all very helpful measures to prevent second waves and so on to happen. There is that risk, it's not gone. In the meantime, you of course want to use all the ability you have to make sure you get vaccination. I know that Ghana is going through COVAX, is also going through the African Union. It's going in terms of getting vaccine doses. But again, like I said, there's going to require an international push on this front to make sure that all countries get access to vaccines, and not just getting access to vaccine, but in terms of the distribution and the logistics and getting actual vaccinations happen. It's not just good for the country who you give the vaccine to, but it's also very good for the world to have to do this right. Otherwise, more generally, of course, in terms of the growth strategy, investing in a better business environment, investing in education, encouraging private investment, but also in putting in place a social safety net to make sure that the social spending of the economy is enough to help the most vulnerable in the country at all times. All of these are very important measures.
All right, Gita. Thanks. We have another question here. It says, what policies in terms of financial development or financial inclusion do policymakers need to consider in dealing with losses caused by the pandemic?
So again, the way this crisis has hit different people is very different. So there are companies and businesses that have done just fine. They've been able to function well remotely, working from home, but there are other sectors that were very hard hit. Now, in countries that have the fiscal space to do so, they've provided pretty generous grants to a lot of small businesses. They've provided grants to companies so that they can keep their labor matched with them. You have what's called the short-time work schemes, which basically subsidize your wages that you have to pay so that you can keep the worker and the firm matched. So that has worked. In other countries that don't have the space, you can't be as generous, so you have to be far more targeted. But you can certainly point to sectors that, because of the policies that are in place, because of the health measures that are in place, they're getting very hard hit. And then you target the support to them, because you know that once this is over and we pass the pandemic, we will see recoveries in the sector. So you don't want to create too much damage to it. So supporting this is very important. These sectors is very important. Targeted support is very important. I know that Ghana has done kind of low-cost financing to small businesses. So those kinds of measures would help for now. Now, of course, there's going to be what happens once you pass the pandemic, when you start removing all kinds of support, what happens? And I think there are challenges that many countries will face. There could be additional, you could see many more businesses shutting down that previously, because you put restrictions, you put moratoria on making loan payments and so on. That was not an issue in the pandemic, but now it is. So you could see a lot of turbulence there. So again, the approach has to be that you react very quickly. You have to be agile. You have to prioritize the resources, do well, target it well to help these kinds of help households and firms.
All right, thank you, Gita. It's been great having this conversation with you. And we also want to thank the students for their questions. I'll hand over to Prof to take over from here.
Thank you so much, Gita. It's been extraordinary. I must say that your presentation, your understanding of the dynamics, the exposure you have given us, I am tempted to say that this itself is job rich and inclusive enough. Thank you very much. It is very clear from where I sit and what I've heard so far, that there's a lot that has to be done to translate the projections into actual in the midst of the uncertainty where risk has become riskier. But we don't have a choice. We have to move forward. A lot of the projections depends also on health breakthroughs, vaccinations, and our ability to contain the mutations that we are seeing. To that extent, I think it's very good. We have learned that 2020 was an extraordinary year, given the impact of the pandemic. And we are told that the pandemic really affected countries with a lot of contact-intensive subsectors. But there is hope in terms of policies that can be implemented both at the national level, the regional level, and the global level. I took note of the effort of the IMF in terms of ensuring debt sustainability and their discussion with the G20. And we look forward to a good outcome from that perspective, so that, because we know a lot of developing countries, low-income countries, practically do not have the fiscal space, and yet they have to increase spending in the face of collapsed revenue envelope and then limited fiscal space that they are confronted with. Then we also straight into the area of digitization and the fact that there's the need to balance investment in this area in order to take advantage of the opportunities that digitization offers for as a result of the pandemic. And the understanding is that this has come to stay, and the gig economy is something that we look forward to from our continent as well. And this will require that appropriate investments are made in this area. It's been really, really very, very useful and eye-opener to all of us. And I believe that for a lot of our students who have joined from all over the place, all over the continent, it's really a great inspiration to all of us, Gita. And your level of understanding, the composure, and all of that is worth emulating. We are very grateful. I want to take this opportunity on behalf of University of Ghana to say that we are proud of this partnership, and we look forward to another engagement, probably physical, when things permit that. And let me thank the IMF team in Washington. It's been very, very fruitful. And then also the IMF team in Ghana. And I want to thank Dennis and Sarah and all those who have joined from all over the continent and beyond. And let's continue to observe all the social protocols. Let's continue to do that which behoves us to do. We'll continue to also trust God for safety. And let's hope that there will be greater breakthroughs along the lines of health and vaccinations, so that we come out of this healthy and sustainably. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bokpin. Thank you. And yes, I would really much like to be there physically in Ghana at some point, if I'm lucky enough.
You will certainly be lucky. It's going to happen very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.